Maniac Magee, Chapter 25. In the morning, Grayson bought Maniac an Egg McMuffin and a large orange juice. He bought the same thing for himself, so they ate breakfast together in the baseball equipment room. "You sent me to bed without a story last night," Maniac kidded. Grayson brushed a yellow speck of egg from his white stubble.
"I don't got no stories, I told you."
"You wanted to be a baseball player."
"That ain't no story."
"Well, did you become one?" Grayson drank half his orange juice.
"Just the minors,"
he muttered. Maniac yelped. "The minors?"
"Couldn't never make it to the majors."
There was a frayed weariness in the old man's words, as though they had long since worn out. "Grayson! The minors! Man, you must have been good. What position did you play?" Grayson said,
"Pitcher."
This word, unlike the others, was not worn out at all, but fresh and robust. It startled Maniac. It declared, "I am not what you see. I am not a line-laying, pick-up-driving, live-at-the-Y, bean-brained park hand. I am not rickety, whiskered worm chow. I am a pitcher." Maniac had sensed there was something more to the old man. Now he knew what it was. "Grayson, what's your first name?" The old man fidgeted.
"Earl. But call me Grayson like everybody."
He looked at the clock on the wall.
"Gotta go."
"Grayson, wait."
"I'm late for work. You ought to be in school."
He was gone. Grayson returned at noon, bearing Zeps and sodas, and was not allowed to leave until he told Maniac one story about the minor leagues. So he told the kid about his first day in the minors, with Bluefield, West Virginia, in the Appalachian League, Class D.
"Can't get no lower than that," he told the kid. "That's where you broke in. Don't have D-ball no more."
He told about thumbing a ride to Bluefield, and when he got there, going up to a gas station attendant and asking which way to the ballpark, and the gas station man told him, "Sure, but first I gotta ask you something. You're a new ball player, right? Just coming on board?" And Grayson said,
"Yep, that's right."
And the man said, "I thought so. Well, then you're just gonna want to make your first stop right over there." He pointed across the street. "That there restaurant is the Blue Star. You just go right in there and sit yourself down and tell the waitress you want the biggest steak on the menu, and anything else you want too, because it's all on the house. The Blue Star treats every new rookie to his first meal in town free." He gave a wink. "They want your business." Great, thought Grayson, and he did just that. Only, when he got up and left, the restaurant owner came running after him down the street, all mad at Grayson for skipping out. And when Grayson told him he was a rookie just picking up his free first meal, the owner got even madder. Seems the gas station man was a real card and liked to welcome dumb rookies with his little practical joke. And that's how it came to be when the Bluefield Bullets took the field that day. They did so without the services of their new pitcher, who was back in the kitchen of the Blue Star restaurant doing dishes to work off a 16-ounce steak, half-broiled chicken, and 2 pieces of rhubarb pie. After a story like that, Maniac just couldn't stay behind. So, he tagged along when Grayson went back to work. He helped the old man raise a new fence around the children's petting farmyard. When the park superintendent came around and asked about the kid, Grayson said it was his nephew come to visit for a while. The superintendent, who managed the budget, said, "We can't pay him, you know." And Grayson said, "Fine, no problem." And that was that. From then on, Maniac was on the job with Grayson every afternoon. They raised fences, mended fences, hurdled stone, patched asphalt, painted, trimmed trees. They ate breakfast, lunch, and dinner together, sometimes in the equipment room, sometimes at a restaurant. They spent weekends together. All the while, Grayson told baseball stories, insisting all along, "I ain't got no stories." He told about the Appalachian League and the Carolina League and the Pecos Valley League and the Buckeye and the Mexican Leagues, about the Paducah Twin Oaks and the Natchez Pelicans and the Jessup Georgia Browns and the Laredo Lariats, all minor league teams, minor league baseball. Sleazy hotels, sleazy buses, sleazy stadiums, sleazy fans, sleazy water buckets, curve balls and bus fumes and dreams, dreams of the majors, clean sheets, and an umpire at every base. Funny stories, happy stories, sad stories, just plain baseball stories. The happiest story being the one about Willie Mays' very last at-bat in the minor leagues before he went up to the New York Giants and immortality. Well, it was old Grayson himself who had the last crack at Mays in the 9th inning of a game with Indianapolis. And what did Grayson do? All he did was set the Say Hey Kid down swinging on 3 straight curveballs. The saddest story was the one about the scout who came down from the Toledo Mud Hens. The Mud Hens had a roster slot, and the scout had a notion to fill it with the pitcher with the wicked curveball, name of Earl Grayson. This was Grayson's big chance. for the Mud Hens were Class AAA ball, one short step from the majors. The night before the game, Grayson spent half of it on his knees by his bed praying. And even 5 minutes before the game, in the dugout, he bent down, pretending to tie his shoe, and closed one eye and prayed, "Please let me win this ball game," which was something, since he had never gone to church in his life. "God must have fainted," he said to Maniac. And indeed, maybe God did, or maybe he only listened to major leaguers, because Grayson took the mound and proceeded to pitch the flat-out awfulest game of his life. His curveball wasn't curving, his sinker wasn't sinking, his knuckler wasn't knuckling. The batters were teeing off, as if it were the invasion of Normandy Beach. Before the third inning was over, the score was 12-0, and Grayson was in the showers. He was 27 years old then, and that was the closest he would ever get to the big show. He hung on for 13 more years, a baseball junkie, winding up in some hot tamale league in Guantanamo, Mexico, until his curveball could no longer bend around so much as a chili pepper, and his fastball was slower than a senorita's answer. He was 40, out of baseball, and, for all intents and purposes, out of life. All those years in the game, and all he was fit to do was clean a restroom, or sweep a floor, or lay a chalk line, or, far, far down the road, tell stories to a wide-eyed homeless kid. Chapter 26. It was impossible to listen to such stories empty-handed. As soon as Grayson started one, Maniac would reach into one of the equipment bags and pull out a ball or a bat or a catcher's mitt, sniffing the scuffed horsehide aroma of the ball, rippling the fingertips over the red stitching. It's hard to say how these things can make the listening better, but they do. And, for Maniac, they did. And of course, as happens with baseball, one thing led to another, and pretty soon the two of them were tossing a ball back and forth. And then they were outside, where the throws could be longer, where you could play pepper on the outfield grass of the Legion field, the old man pitching, the kid tapping grounders, where you could shag fungos, the old man popping high flyers, the kid chasing them down. And now the stories were mixed with instruction. The grizzled, rickety coot showing the kid how to spray liners to the opposite field, how to get a jump on a long fly even before the batter hits it, how to throw the curveball. Stiff, crooked fingers that grappled clumsily with crimpet wrappers curled naturally around the shape of a baseball. With a ball in his hand, the park handyman became a professor. As to the art of pitching, of course, the old man could show and tell, but he could no longer do, except for one pitch, the only one left in his repertoire from the old days. He called it the stop ball, and it nearly drove Maniac goofy. The old man claimed he'd discovered the stop ball one day down in the Texas League, and that he was long gone from baseball when he perfected it. Unlike most pitches, the stop ball involved no element of surprise. On the contrary, the old man would always announce it. "Okay," he'd call from the mound. "Here she comes. Now keep your eye on her, 'cause she's gonna float on up there, and just about the time she's over the plate, she's gonna stop. Now nobody else ever hit it, so don't you go getting upset if you don't neither. It's no shame to whiff on the stop ball." And then he'd throw it. Well, of course, Maniac knew that most, if not all, of that was blarney. And just to make sure, he watched the ball extra carefully. There sure didn't seem to be anything unusual about it. Not at first, anyway. But as the ball came closer, it did somehow seem to get more and more peculiar, and by the time it reached the plate, it might just as well have stopped, because Maniac never knew if he was swinging at the old man's pitch or at his speech. Whatever, in weeks of trying, he never hit out of the infield. It was October. The trees rimming the outfield were flaunting their colors. The kid and the geezer baseballed their lunchtimes away, and the afternoon dinner times and weekends. And every night, as the old man left for his room at the Y, he would grouse, "You ought to go to school." And one night the kid said back, "I do." And that's how the old man found out what the kid was doing with his mornings. He had noticed the books before, rows and piles of them that kept growing, but there being books, he didn't think much of it. Now the kid tells him, "You know the money you give me?" Each morning, he gave the kid 50 cents or $1 to get himself some crimpets. "Well, I take it up to the library. Right inside the door, they have these books they're selling, cases of them, old books they don't want anymore. They only cost 5 or 10 cents apiece." He pointed to the piles. "I buy them." He showed them to the old man. Ancient, back-broken math books, flaking travel books, warped spellers, mangled mysteries, biographies, music books, astronomy books, cookbooks. "What's the matter?" said the old man. "Can't you make up your mind what kind you want?" The kid laughed. "I want them all." He threw his hands out. I'm learning everything. He opened one of the books. Look, geometry, triangles. Okay, isosceles triangles. These two legs, they look equal to you? The old man squinted. He nodded. Okay, but can you prove it? The old man studied the triangle for a full minute. If I had a ruler, maybe. No ruler. The old man sighed. Guess I give up. So the kid proved it. Absolutely. Dead center proved it. 2 days later, while playing Pepper in the Legion infield, the old man said to the kid, So, why don't you go ahead and teach me how to read? Chapter 27. The story he told now was not about baseball. It was about parents who were drunk a lot and always leaving him out on his own. About being put in classes where they just cut paper and played games all day. About a teacher who whispered to a principal just outside the classroom door, This bunch will never learn to read a stop sign. Right then and there, as if to make the teacher right, he stopped trying. The part I didn't tell you about Bluefield. I was only 15. I ran away. The kid and the old man climbed into the pickup. They made 3 stops. First, they stopped by the park office at the zoo, where Grayson told the superintendent he just wanted to work part-time for a while, in the afternoons. Fine, said the superintendent. Just so you don't expect to be paid full-time. Then they went to the library book sale racks and bought about 20 old picture books, such as The Story of Babar and Mike Mulligan's Steam Shovel and The Little Engine That Could. Then they went to Woolworth's for a small portable blackboard and a piece of chalk. Within 3 days, Grayson had the alphabet down pat, the shapes, the sounds. After a week, he could read 10 one-syllable words, but he was reading them from memory. It took another couple of weeks before he began to get the hang of sounding out words he had never seen before. The old man showed an early knack for consonants. Sometimes he got M and N mixed up, but the only one that gave him trouble day in and day out was C. It reminded him of a bronc some cowboy dared him to ride in his Texas League days. He would saddle up that C, climb aboard and grip the pommel for dear life, and old C, more often than not, it would throw him. Whenever that happened, he'd just climb right back up and ride her some more. Pretty soon, C saw who was boss and gave up the fight. But even at their orniest, consonants were fun. Vowels were something else. He didn't like them, and they didn't like him. There were only 5 of them, but they seemed to be everywhere. Why, you could go through 20 words without bumping into some of the shyer consonants, but it seemed as if you couldn't tiptoe past a syllable without waking up with a vowel. Consonants, you knew pretty much where they stood, but you could never trust a vowel. To the old pitcher, they were like his own best knuckleball come back to haunt him. In, out, up, down. Not even the pitcher, much less the batter, knew which way it would break. He kept swinging and missing. But the kid was a good manager, and tough. He would never let him slink back to the showers, but kept sending him back up to the plate. The kid used different words, but in his ears the old minor leaguer heard, Keep your eye on it, hold your swing, watch it all the way in, don't be anxious, just make contact. And soon enough, that's what he was doing, nailing those vowels on the button, riding them from consonant to consonant, syllable to syllable, word to word. One day, the kid wrote on the blackboard, I see the ball. And the old man studied it a while, and said slowly, gingerly, I see the ball. Maniac whooped, You're reading. I'm reading, yipped the old man. His smile was so wide, he'd have to break it into sections to fit it through a doorway. Chapter 28. The first book Grayson read cover to cover was The Little Engine That Could. It took almost an hour, and was the climax of a long evening of effort. At the end, the old man was sweating and exhausted. The kid's reaction surprised him. He didn't jump and yippee like he did after the first sentence. He just stayed in the far corner, seated on a stuffed and lumpy equipment bag. He had kept his distance all during the reading, letting Grayson know there would be no cheating, and had to do it on his own. Now he was just staring at Grayson, a small smile coming over his face. And now he was making a fist and clenching it toward Grayson. And he said, Amen.
What's that?
Amen.
What's that for? Who prayed?
I learned it in the church I used to go to. You don't have to wait for a prayer. You say it when somebody says something or does something you really like. He hopped off the bag, thrust both hands to the ceiling, and shouted, Amen! And suddenly the kid was hugging him, squeezing with a power you never suspected was in that little body, unless you had seen him pole a baseball almost to the trees in dead center field. Okay, said Maniac, clapping his hands. What'll it be? I'll be the cook. Whatever you want. Maniac had a toaster oven now. compliments of his whiskered friend. In fact, little by little, Grayson had bought him a lot of things. A chest of drawers for his clothes, a space heater, a 2-foot refrigerator, hundreds of paper dishes and plastic utensils, blankets, a mat to sleep on, which the kid ignored, preferring the chest protectors. In time, the place was homier than his own room at the Y.
"How about a corn muffin?"
said Grayson, choosing something easy on his bad teeth and aching gums. Maniac went to the bookcase that served as a pantry. "1 corn muffin coming up? Toasted?"
"Yeah, why not?"
"Butter?"
"Sure, butter."
"Something to drink with that, sir?"
"Nah, muffin's enough."
"The apple juice is excellent, sir. It was a great year for apples." Live it up, thought Grayson.
"Yeah, okay, apple juice."
"Coming right up, sir." After the snack, the kid proved himself as good a mind reader as a cook. "Why don't you stay overnight?" he said. "It's late." While he groused about so preposterous an idea, the kid laid down the mat he never used, bulldogged him down to it, pulled off his shoes, and draped a blanket over him. He protested.
"This is supposed to be yours."
The kid patted his chest protectors. I'm okay. And he knew that was the truth of it. The old man gave himself up willingly to his exhaustion and drifted off like a lazy, sky-high flyball. Something deep in his heart, unmeasured by his own consciousness, soared, unburdened for the first time in 37 years. Since that time, he had so disgraced himself before the Mud Hens Scout and named himself thereafter a failure. The blanket was there, but it was the boy's embrace that covered and warmed him. When somebody does something you really like, amen, the old man whispered to the cornmeal and baseball-scented darkness. Chapter 29. For most of November, Winter toyed with Two Mills, whispered in its ear, tickled it under the chin. On Thanksgiving Thursday, Winter kicked it in the stomach. But that didn't stop the old man and the boy from joining the 10,000 who thronged to the stadium on the boulevard to see the traditional high school football game. The Arctic air laid panes of ice over the crayfish edge pools of Stony Creek. The effect was the opposite on human noses. Maniacs and Graysons ran like faucets, and not a handkerchief in sight. They deputized their sleeves and grabbed handfuls of napkins from the refreshment stand. Two Mills won the game, thanks to a last-minute 73-yard touchdown pass from quarterback Dennehy to James Hands Down. From the instant his old trash-talking Sandlock pal cradled the ball in his long brown fingers, Maniac was jumping on his seat, screaming trash at Hand's pursuers, every step to the goal line, and glancing about to make sure Mrs. Beale wasn't hearing. By the time they got back to the baseball room, they were nearly frozen. But the freeze was good, for it made the warmth of the little apartment all the more welcome. Within 15 minutes, the space heater had the place positively tropical, while in the toaster oven, their 5-pound Thanksgiving chicken was already beginning to brown. A pair of hot plates and a squad of pots were pressed into action, and by mid-afternoon, the two were sitting down to a feast of roast chicken, gravy, cranberry sauce, applesauce, SpaghettiOs, raisins, pumpkin pie, and butterscotch crimpets. Maniac thought of Thanksgivings past, of sitting around a joyless table, his aunt and uncle as silent and lifeless as the mammoth bird they gnawed on. He said this grace: "Dear God, we want to take this opportunity to thank you for the best Thanksgiving dinner we ever had. Well, I ever had. I guess I shouldn't speak for my friend Grayson." He peeked across the table. "Grayson," he whispered, "is this your best one too?" The old man opened one eye. He shrugged.
"Don't know. Ain't tasted it yet."
Maniac glared, rolled his eyes upward, hissed, "Grayson!" The old man flinched.
Yeah."
He squinted, one-eyed at the chicken.
"Yeah, I guess it is."
"The best," Maniac prompted.
"The best."
Maniac went on, "And we want to thank you for this warm house and for our own little family here and for Grayson learning to read. He's already read 13 books, as I'm sure you already know. And one more thing, if you could find some way to let the Beale family know I'm wishing them a happy Thanksgiving, I'd really appreciate it. They're the ones on 728 Sycamore Street, in case there's any other Beales around. Amen."
"Amen,"
said Grayson. They stuffed themselves silly, then collapsed and listened to polka music. Grayson had brought over a record player a week before, along with his entire music collection. 31 polka records. Grayson loved polkas. Of course, one cannot listen to polka music for long before getting up and dancing, which is what the two Thanksgivers did as soon as their bloated stomachs allowed. They danced and they laughed, record after record. Whether it was the polka that they danced is another question. It was nearly dark, both of them having re-collapsed, when Maniac said, "Is there any paint around?"
"Guess so,"
said Grayson.
"What for?"
"You'll see. Can you get some and a brush?" The old man dragged himself up.
"What color?"
"How about black? 5 minutes later, the old man was back.
Got brown. That do?
Fine, said Maniac. He opened the can, stirred the paint, put a jacket on, grabbed the brush, and went outside. Grayson followed. He watched the kid paint on the outside of the door in careful strokes. 101. Maniac stepped back, admiring his work. 101, he proclaimed. 101 Bandshell Boulevard. Chapter 30. If Thanksgiving was wonderful, Christmas was paradise. By now, Grayson had officially moved out of the Y and into 101 Bandshell Boulevard. Thanks to his long acquaintanceship with the locker room attendant, he and Maniac were privileged to continue using the Y shower facilities at their pleasure. For decoration outside, they nailed a wreath to the door. There was only one small window, but it had no sill to hold a candle, so some spray snow had to do. Inside was another story. Santa's elves themselves would have felt at home. Strings of popcorn swooped across the ceiling, evergreen branches flared at random, dispersing their piney aroma. Wherever there were a few vacant square inches, something Christmassy appeared. A matchbox crush, a porcelain Santa, a partridge in a pear tree. One day Grayson dragged a pair of tree limbs in and started sawing away. When he was finished, a wooden reindeer stood in the room, big enough for Maniac to ride. Of course, the tree got the most attention of all. By the time the two of them finished trimming it, their tree-trimming instincts having languished for so many Christmases, hardly a pine needle could be seen under the tinsel and balls and whatnot. In fact, though they were delighted with their effort, the urge to trim was still upon them. One room was simply too small to hold the spirit bursting, so they went outside and crossed the creek and tramped the woods until they came to a fine and proper evergreen, and there, their footsteps muffled by the carpet of pine needles, their every breath and whispered word arrayed in frosty white, they trimmed their second tree. This time the ornaments were nature's brilliant red and yellow necklaces of bittersweet pungent pine cones, wine-red clusters of sumac berries, abandoned bird-bodied boats of milkweed, delicate thumb-sized goblets of Queen Anne's lace. Chapter 31. It was still dark when Maniac awoke on Christmas morning. Within an hour or two, the holiday would come bounding down the stairs and squealing round the tinseled trees of 2 mills. But for the moment, Christmas bided its time outside, a purer presence. Maniac shook Grayson awake, but stayed the old man's hand when he reached out to turn on the light. They bundled themselves and ventured into the silent night. Maniac carried a paper bag. Snow had fallen several days before. In much of the town, it had been plowed, shoveled, and slushed away, but in the park, along the creek, the woods, the playing fields, the playground, it still lay undisturbed, save for the tracks of rabbits and squirrels. Beyond the tall pines, stars glittered like snowflakes, reluctant to fall. They visited their tree. They stood silently just to be near it, letting the magic of it drift over them. In the pine-patched moonlight, the Queen Anne's goblets looked for all the world like filigreed silver. They walked the creek woods all the way to the zoo, meandering wordlessly throughout the snowy enchantment. As if by design, they both stopped at the same spot above the half-submerged rooty clump of a fallen tree. Somewhere under there, they knew, was the den of a family of muskrats. The old man laid a pine branch at the doorway. Maniac whispered, "Merry Christmas." They visited the animals at the zoo, at least the outdoor ones, wishing them a happy holiday. The ducks seemed particularly pleased to see them. By the time they came to the buffalo pen, dawn was showing through the trees. Before the old man finished saying, "Want a boost?" Maniac was up and over the fence. If Mother Buffalo was glad to see the fence-hopping human again, she didn't show it. But Baby came trotting on over, and the two of them had a warm reunion. Before leaving, Maniac reached into the paper bag and brought out a present. "For you," he said. It was a scarf. Or rather, 3 scarves tied together. He wrapped them around Baby's neck. "Next year, I'll get you stockings for your horns," he grinned. "If you have them by then." A final nuzzle, and he was back over the fence. They headed back home as the town awoke. Breakfast was eggnog and hot tea and cookies and carols and colored lights and love. As in all happy Christmas homes, the gifts were under the tree. Maniac gave Grayson a pair of gloves and a woolen cap and a book. The book did not appear to be as sturdy as the others lying around. The cover was blue construction paper, and the spine, instead of being bound, was stapled. The text was hand-lettered, and the pictures were stick figures. The title was "The Man Who Struck Out Willie Mays." The author's name, which Grayson read aloud with some difficulty, was Jeffrey L. Magee. Maniac, in his turn, opened packages to find a pair of gloves, a box of butterscotch crimpets, and a spanking, snow-white, never-used baseball. He was overjoyed. He rushed to the old man and hugged him. The old man put up with that for a second, then pulled away. "Hold on," he said. He went to one of the baseball equipment bags and reached in, tunneled down to the bottom, and came up with another package, this one wrapped crudely in newspaper.
"Hiding this'n," he said. "Didn't know if you're the kind of kid sneaks looks."
Maniac tore it open and gaped helplessly when he saw what it was. To anyone else, it was a ratty old scrap of leather, barely recognizable as a baseball glove, fit for the garbage can. But Maniac knew at once this was Grayson's, the one he had played with all those years in the minors. It was limp, flat, the pocket long since gone. Slowly, timidly, as though entering a shrine, the boy's fingers crept into it, flexed, curled the cracked leather, brought it back to shape, to life. He laid the new ball in the palm, pressed the glove and ball together, and the glove remembered and gave way and made a pocket for the ball. The boy could not take his eyes off the glove. The old man could not take his eyes off the boy. The record player finished the Christmas polka and clicked off, and for a long time there was silence. 5 days later, the old man was dead.